If you click on any of these things, you get a nice little comment thing that comes up, and it posts back and stores the comments for the chapter. And it's quite nice. It wasn't quite, though, what I was aiming for. In the Django book, I'm guessing what they do is they have the entire chapter ready, and they put it out there, and it sits there for a period of time while it collects comments. So the comments are attached to elements by position. If you go and look at the code for that, there's a bit of JavaScript that runs down the HTML and looks for certain characteristics, a class attribute, I think, of some value, and will know to hook the JavaScript and so on that part. If, however, you were to take a paragraph and move it later on in the page or insert some text, all that falls on the floor. My approach was I want to just have, ideally, more frequent updates to the site. So if I added text, drop text, and so on, the comments should move forward. And so I had to do a bunch of hacking around and so on. So I thought that having a positional base would be a bit too fragile. So the basic idea for my approach is HTML elements will be given a unique ID. The IDs for that element will be driven by the content, which, given a long enough string, is unique enough. And the comments will map to these IDs and not to element location. And one of the reasons, if you're wondering why WordPress, is I really think it's kind of best of breed for this sort of stuff. And it's more one of these, hey, I wonder if sorts of things. I've seen other people talk about the idea of just using it because they may have a site that wasn't meant just for comments, and so you just route somebody off to WordPress site, which has nice admin tools, it has plugins for spam handling, for managing your comments and so on, for filtering. And why build all that stuff? Well, I mean, people who are building it, I'm sure you have your reasons, but for me, it was a good tool. So the process I came up with was I fetch or create the source HTML. I run it through an element processor, which examines the text for the page that I want to have comments on. It rewrites that by adding this particular ID and some class attributes, pushes in some more elements for adding scripting and so on, and it writes out a new page. So what's nice about this is, in theory, you could take any random plain HTML page that can get through HBCOT and turn it into a system that has commenting overlaid on top of it. And if you go up to beginningruby.com, poke around, you'll see it's quite similar to the Django book site. Change the colors, right? And so when you click on this thing, you get this box, and you get the comments and such that are related to this particular chunk of text identified by what amounts to a hash key for that bit of string. Now, a bit more about this particular process and how this works with WordPress is the client code, which is just an app that runs local on, say, my machine or on the server. When it runs through this HTML and it wants to modify these element nodes, it sends a request out to an application I've just arbitrarily called Comment, because it just needs a cool name, and Comment Engine just wasn't spiffy enough. So it goes out and hits this thing that sits and spins practically anywhere and says, I've got this text, I've turned it into this unique ID. Comment, in turn, will go out and send that request and goes and hits the instance of WordPress and creates a new post with the title of that ID. So at that point, all the comments that are attached to the content on the Beginning Ruby site are actually comments attached to posts on some whatever hidden WordPerfect instance, where every post is just basically this GUID that identifies a chunk of text. When a user then goes to the site and wants to add a comment, there's two things that happen. The static page just comes off Apache, just plain HTML. And the same with the JavaScript that comes down. But when you make a request back, the request goes to mod proxy, which in turn routes it to this particular comment server. So there's basically two kinds of signaling going on between just the plain regular site, and then there's the commenting behavior that gets overlaid on top of it. My professional graphics here should make this crystal clear if my explanation wasn't. Okay. Are there any questions? So that, of course, is the web page, and you get the plain static HTML here coming off Apache. When you hit the comments URL, though, mod proxy sends this off to another process running someplace else, and that's the comment engine. And that, in turn, is talking to WordPress. Now, what I kind of like about this is, aside from the fact that I can now have comments that are attached to particular chunks of text and not so much positional elements, is when the time comes that there's a Ruby substitute that does just what I want in a way that I want, I can just drop WordPerfect and swap it in. And all the clients of this part just don't know anything about it. From all they know is they're making requests off to some URL. There's just some REST API. They hit stuff out there. They get back either comment counts or content or so on. So the good part about this is I get to use WordPress as my comment admin tool, and it's quite nice for that. The other thing is, this is only mostly true. It's plausibly usable with any website, which is, say, if you just have a page that generates static HTML, conceivably you could run this through this process and overlay it with enough JavaScript and so on, talk to a comment server out the back end and get commenting and markup for arbitrary elements on the page. I think it's a rather slick thing, rather than have to worry about building that in for any particular page you make. Okay, the bad part is I actually had to touch PHP. And to be fair, if you go and look at the PHP for WordPress, it's quite easy. It's quite clean to go in there and poke around and change stuff. Now, I really didn't want to do this, and I realized that there's all sorts of problems with doing that. But for one thing, when I update WordPress, well, all that goes away. So that was a hideous mistake. But it was kind of necessary because the XML RPC interface, which ultimately what I used, didn't have the kind of behavior that I wanted. What I needed was a way to make a request that would go and create a new category. Because the way I use it, if I want all the comments for a given page, all the chunks on that page are part of a particular category. So it makes it easy to separate stuff out, but there was no Meta Weblog API thing, whatever, WordPress API that would do that for me in the version I have. I washed my hands afterwards, though, if you're worried about that. The JavaScript libraries are full of just like skanky stuff. There was a lot of XPath kind of stuff and fire-related stuff. So when I tried just setting this up on another website, I found just how hard it was to get it right. Because it's very, very specific right now to its particular environment. And if you go and look at, say, beginning Ruby and compare it to the Django book site, the structure of the HTML is quite similar because that was the path of least resistance, right? Just have kind of the same markup on the internals there, and it just more or less just works. And because this started out as sort of a monolithic application that was supposed to do publishing and commenting and evolved off of this, those of you who've ever seen Isle of Lost Souls will know what I'm talking about when I say this would thrill Dr. Moreau, because it's a weird melding of animal and human. Lessons learned here that WordPress is in fact easy to hack, but plugins are the way to go. And I've since been talking to some people who do some serious WordPress hacking, and they've given me some insight on how to do this, which makes it a lot cleaner. One of the things that is appealing to me about doing this sort of stuff is more and more people are distributing applications simply as virtual machines. There's a company based in Phoenix called Jumpbox that does this. They'll package up an application that runs strictly as a virtual machine of your choice. You can run it under Parallels or VMware or the Microsoft Virtual Machine or Zen. And it makes it very nice and it's very attractive, but it's extremely encapsulated. You don't really have the option of going in there and changing stuff. But in their particular version, their packaging of WordPress, I believe you do have the option of installing plugins. So it makes it a lot cleaner. It would protect me from any future upgrades. It makes it easier to drop stuff in. Repurposing other people's code can bite you hard. I think that's a known problem. But the nice thing is there was interesting progress in spin-offs. Just I hadn't planned on doing it, but it just sort of ended up that I may have a more general purpose commenting tool, which I'm pretty happy with. And I think that only came about because I was in this peculiar circumstances of just trying to use WordPress in my comment engine.